Obese girl slept in pig. Sty after family betrayal, mountain man's dawn, visit changed everything. The year was 1820. The American frontier was not a place for the fragile, nor was it kind to those who did not fit the mold of the lean, hardened pioneer. Fort Laramie at this time was less a fortress of stone and more a rough constellation of timber trading posts and makeshift corrals, a vital, lung-breathing life into the early fur trade along the North Platte River. It was a place where dusty riders, French trappers, and wary emigrants crossed paths, their eyes fixed on the horizon or the bottom of a whiskey bottle. In the shadow of this bustling, rough-hewn commerce lived Hannah. Hannah was 20 years old, though her eyes carried the weary resignation of a woman twice her age. She was the daughter of Virginia farmers who had migrated west chasing a dream that turned into a nightmare. They had died 3 months prior, claimed by the river fever, the malaria that stalked the Platte like a silent predator. Hannah, however, survived. She was built differently than her late parents or her 2 older brothers, Thomas and Silas. Hannah was a large woman. Her size was a subject of cruel fascination in the settlement. Some whispered it was gluttony, but Hannah knew the truth was more complex. During the lean years of the War of 1812, when rations were scarce in the East, her body had learned to hold on to every scrap of sustenance it was given. She was stout, heavy-set, and strong, with arms that could lift a cast-iron pot with ease. But in the eyes of her brothers, now the masters of their parents' small inheritance, she was merely a mouth to feed. The betrayal happened on a Tuesday, under a sky the color of bruised iron. "We can't carry you, Hannah," Thomas had said, not even looking her in the eye. He was packing the wagon to move further towards the Oregon Territory, abandoning the plot their parents had tried to cultivate. "The oxen are old, the wagon is full. You take up the space of 2 sacks of grain." "But I can walk," Hannah had pleaded, her voice trembling. "I can cook, I can mend." "And eat us out of house and home before we hit the sweet water?" Silas spat, tossing her meager bundle of clothes into the mud. "You're on your own. Find a husband if you can, though God knows who'd take a woman who looks like a prize sow." They left her there as the sun began to dip. They took the wagon, the mules, the family Bible, and the small pouch of silver coins their father had hidden in the chimney. Hannah was left with nothing but the clothes on her back, a faded calico dress strained at the seams, and a heart shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. With nowhere to go and no coin to buy a room at the inn, Hannah wandered to the edge of the settlement. The innkeeper, a sour-faced man named Mr. Gentry, refused to let her sleep in the stables, fearing she would scare the horses. "The pigsty, then," Gentry had laughed, wiping a rag across the bar. "Pigs don't mind company of their own kind. You can sleep with the sows, girl, just don't eat their slop." And so, the daughter of honest farmers became the tenant of a sty. It was a humiliating, pungent existence. The sty was a fenced enclosure of rotting wood and mud behind the trading post. It smelled of ammonia and wet earth. But it had a roof, a lean-to that blocked the worst of the wind. Hannah fashioned a bed from dry straw in the corner, furthest from the trough. The first week was a blur of tears. The local children, cruel as only unchecked youth can be, found sport in her misery. They would stand by the fence, throwing clumps of dried mud or small stones at her. "Look at the mud queen," they would jeer. "Hail to the queen of the pigs." For Hannah learned to curl into a ball, covering her head with her arms. She never fought back. She felt she deserved this. She had internalized her brother's words. She was a burden, a waste of space. Her only comfort came from the very creatures she was forced to live with. There was a sow with a litter of piglets, and the smallest of them, a spotted, scrawny thing the others pushed away, became her friend. She named him Pip. When Hannah managed to scavenge rotten vegetables from the trash heaps behind the inn, or find half-eaten cobs of corn, she didn't eat them all herself. She would sit in the muck, break the food in half, and feed Pip. "Eat up, little one," she would whisper, her voice a soft melody in the harsh surroundings. "You have to grow strong. The world doesn't love the small, and it hates the big. So you must be strong." It was this act of kindness, performed in the gray light of dawn, that caught the eye of the man who walked like a shadow. Elias was a man woven from the very fabric of the wilderness. He was a mountain man in every sense of the word, a trapper of beaver who spent 9 months of the year in the high Rockies, descending to the forts only to trade pelts for powder, lead, and coffee. He was a terrifying figure to behold. Standing well over 6 feet tall, he wore buckskins black with grease and smoke. A beard like a tangle of iron wire covered his face, hiding everything but 2 piercing gray eyes. But the most defining feature was the scar. 3 jagged white lines ran from his hairline down across his left cheek, disappearing into his beard, a souvenir from a grizzly bear that had tried to end him 5 years prior. The bear had died. Elias had not. Elias spoke little. He preferred the company of his horse and the silence of the pine forests. He had come to Fort Laramie to resupply before the deep winter set in. He camped not in the crowded bunkhouse, but in a small buffalo hide teepee. He pitched on the outskirts of town near the riverbank, just within sight of the trading post's rear lot. He was up before the sun, tending to his pack mules, when he first saw her. The morning mist was clinging to the ground. Elias watched as the heavy wooden gate of the pigsty creaked open. He expected the innkeeper to come out and kick the animals. Instead, he saw a large, round shape emerge from the straw. It was the girl. He had heard the men in the tavern laughing about the obese girl sleeping with the swine, but Elias had no taste for gossip. He watched as she pulled a stale, moldy heel of bread from her pocket. It was likely her breakfast, perhaps the only food she would see that day. But she didn't eat it. She knelt in the mud, heedless of the filth staining her dress, and held it out. A tiny, weak piglet stumbled toward her. Elias froze. The image struck him with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just pity. It was memory. 30 years ago, back in Kentucky, a fire had consumed his childhood cabin. His mother, a woman of substantial size and infinite warmth, had used her own body to shield him from the falling timbers. She had starved herself during that subsequent winter so that Elias could eat the meager rations of cornmeal. She had been ridiculed for her size by the town gossips, yet her heart had been the vastest thing Elias had ever known. Seeing Hannah stroke the piglet's head while her own stomach surely rumbled, Elias felt a crack in the ice that had encased his heart since his mother's death. She has the spirit of a healer, he thought, living in a place meant for beasts. Elias did not approach her. He knew his appearance frightened women. The scar and the smell of cured leather made people cross the street to avoid him. Instead, he formulated a plan. The next morning, before the sun crested the horizon, Hannah woke to a strange sound near the fence. Thump. She waited until the light grew, then crept to the wooden rails. There, resting on a clean flat stone on top of the fence post, was a skinned rabbit, gutted and ready for the fire. Next to it was a small sack of dried apples. Hannah looked around, her blue eyes wide with confusion. "Hello?" she whispered. No one answered. She roasted the rabbit over a small fire she built in the corner of the sty, sharing the meat with Pip and the mother sow. It was the first fresh meat she had eaten in months. The next dawn, it was a tin of coffee and a loaf of fresh bread wrapped in a clean cloth. The third dawn, a thick wool blanket appeared, draped over the rails to keep the frost off her straw bed. Hannah began to understand she was being watched, but not with malice. She didn't know who her benefactor was. The townspeople still jeered at her when she went to the well, calling her names that stung like sleet. But the mystery gifts gave her strength. She decided to pay the ghost back the only way she knew how. Hannah's grandmother had been a woman of the Appalachians, full of folklore and songs. Hannah possessed a voice that was surprisingly clear and melodious, like a stream running under ice. That evening, as the twilight turned purple, Hannah sat by the sty fence. She didn't see Elias sitting in the shadows of the trees 50 yards away, smoking his pipe. She simply began to sing. It was a lullaby, an old tune about the mountains and the moon. She sang to the pigs, to the wind, and to the invisible kindness that had fed her. Sleep, my child, the wind blows cold, the mountains keep their secrets old, the bear, the wolf, the eagle high, watch over you beneath the sky. In the darkness, Elias let his pipe go out. He closed his eyes, letting the voice wash over him. It was the most beautiful thing he had heard in 10 years of solitude. November turned to December, and the weather turned vicious. The sky became a sheet of white, and the wind screamed down from the Bighorn Mountains, burying Fort Laramie in snow. The blizzard of 20, the old-timers would later call it. It came with a sudden ferocity that caught even the experienced unaware. Elias had been out checking his trap lines a few miles upriver when the storm hit. He should have turned back sooner. His horse, spooked by a sudden crack of thunder, rare for winter but a sign of a truly violent system, reared up on an icy patch of shale. Elias was thrown. He landed hard in a ravine, hearing the sickening crack of bone before he felt the pain. His right leg, just below the knee, was broken. The horse bolted, vanishing into the whiteout. Elias was alone. The pain was a blinding white light, rivaling the snow. He knew the rules of the frontier. If you cannot move, you die. He dragged himself. Inch by agonizing inch, he pulled his heavy frame through the deepening drifts. He had to make it back to the settlement. It took him 6 hours to cover 3 miles. By the time the lights of Fort Laramie flickered through the swirling snow, Elias was delirious with hypothermia and pain. He was crawling on his elbows, his legs dragging like dead weights. He didn't make it to the inn. He didn't make it to the doctor. He collapsed in the alleyway behind the trading post, his body giving up just feet from the pigsty fence. The snow began to cover him immediately, burying the mountain man in a white shroud. Inside the sty, Hannah was huddled under the wool blanket Elias had given her, Pip tucked into her side for warmth. The wind howled, shaking the lean-to. Then she heard a groan. It wasn't a pig. It was human, a deep guttural sound of distress. Hannah threw off the blanket. "Hello?" she called out, her voice snatched away by the wind. She pushed open the gate, fighting the gale. In the dim light reflecting off the snow, she saw a mound near the fence. She waded through the drifts, the cold biting through her thin shoes. She brushed the snow away and gasped. It was the mountain man, the terrifying one with the scar. But now his face was pale as death, his lips blue. "Mister," she shouted, shaking his shoulder, "you have to get up." Elias opened one eye. It was glassy. "Can't," he rasped. "Leg." Hannah looked at his leg. It was twisted at a wrong angle. She looked at the distance to the inn's back door. It was locked, and the storm was drowning out any screams for help. If she left him here to run around to the front, he might freeze before she returned with help, if anyone would even help the Mud Queen. She looked at the man. He was huge, heavy with muscle and soaked buckskins. A normal woman could not have moved him, but Hannah was not a normal woman. She was large. She was sturdy. Her body was built of leverage and power that she had been taught to be ashamed of. "Use it," a voice inside her whispered. "Use the weight." She crouched down in the snow. "I'm going to move you," she yelled over the wind. She grabbed Elias under his arms. Gritting her teeth, she planted her feet deep in the mud and snow. She heaved. A groan of exertion tore from her throat. Her muscles strained, her back tightened, but she lifted his upper body. Dragging him backwards, she used her weight as a counterbalance. She hauled him inch by inch through the gate of the sty. The pigs squealed and scattered as she dragged the giant man into the relative shelter of the lean-to. It wasn't a house, but it was out of the wind. She got him onto her pile of straw. He was shivering violently. Hannah knew what she had to do. She tore strips from her own petticoat. She found 2 sturdy pieces of wood from the broken fence railing. With gentle but firm hands, hands that knew how to dress a chicken or mend a plow, she straightened his leg. Elias screamed once, a terrible sound, and then passed out from the pain. Hannah worked quickly. She bound the splint tight. Then she built up the fire in the corner, shielding it with her body so the wind wouldn't snuff it out. She took the wool blanket, his blanket, and covered him. But he was still shivering, his teeth chattering with the rattle of death. The fire wasn't enough. Hannah hesitated only a moment. She lay down beside him in the straw. She pressed her large, warm, soft body against his freezing, hard one. She wrapped her arms around him, sharing every ounce of heat she possessed. She became a human furnace, fighting the winter for his soul. The night was long. The blizzard raged as if angry it had been cheated of a victim. Sometime past midnight, Elias woke. The pain in his leg was a dull throb, but the cold that had been eating his marrow was gone. He felt warmth, softness. He smelled wet straw, wood smoke, and lavender. Hannah kept a sachet of dried herbs, the last remnant of her mother, pinned to her dress. He realized where he was. He realized who was holding him. He shifted, and Hannah woke instantly. She pulled back, fearful he would be angry. I had to drag you in," she stammered, her face flushing. "You were freezing. I'm sorry if I'm too close." Elias looked at her. The firelight danced in his gray eyes. He looked at the splint on his leg. It was a professional job. He looked at her broad shoulders, her round face streaked with soot, but filled with concern. "You carried me?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Dragged you," she corrected. "You're very heavy, sir." "And you're very strong," Elias said softly. It wasn't an insult. It was awe. Stronger than any man in that fort. Hannah looked down, ashamed. "I'm just big." "No." Elias reached out a rough hand and touched her cheek. "You are mighty, like the mountain." They lay there as the storm blew itself out. To keep him awake, to keep him from slipping back into shock, Hannah talked. "Tell me a story," Elias whispered, wincing as a spasm of pain hit his leg. "Like the songs you sing to the pigs." So Hannah told him stories. She didn't tell him of Virginia. She told him stories she made up, weaving the landscape around them into myths. She told him of the Niobrara River, which she said was actually the tears of a giantess who fell in love with a star. She told him that the thunder was just the buffalo herds running in the sky. Her voice rose and fell, hypnotic and rich. She used her hands to pantomime the eagles and the wolves. Elias watched her, mesmerized. He forgot the pain. He forgot the smell of the pigsty. In the dim light, he didn't see a mud queen. He saw a bard. He saw a woman with a fire inside her that no tragedy could extinguish. "You have a gift, Hannah," he said when she finished a tale about a clever coyote. "Words, they obey you." "My father said stories don't bake bread," Hannah replied sadly. "Your father was a fool," Elias grunted. "Bread feeds the belly. Stories feed the spirit. Out here, men die of broken spirits faster than starvation." For the first time in her life, Hannah felt seen. Not looked at, but seen. "Why did you leave the food?" she asked quietly. "Why help me?" Elias looked at the roof of the lean-to. "Because I saw you share your bread with the runt. Because my mother was like you. Big, soft, strong. The world broke her because she gave too much of herself away. I didn't want the world to break you." Tears pricked Hannah's eyes. She took his hand, his calloused, scarred hand, and held it in hers. They fell asleep like that, hand in hand, amidst the sleeping swine, while the white world outside turned to silence. The next morning broke with a brilliance that hurt the eyes. The sky was a piercing, cloudless blue. The snow lay 3 feet deep, covering the ugliness of the mud, making the world look new and clean. The gate to the pigsty was forced open. The innkeeper, Mr. Gentry and a few of the early risers, including Hannah's brother Thomas, who had been delayed in town by the storm, came to check the livestock. They stopped dead in their tracks. There, emerging from the sty, leaning heavily on the shoulder of the obese girl, was Elias the mountain man. Hannah walked tall. She was supporting his weight, her boots crunching firmly in the snow. She didn't look down. She looked straight ahead. "Elias," Gentry gaped, "we thought you were dead. Your horse came back to the stables alone." "I would be dead," Elias boomed, his voice carrying across the yard, "if not for this woman." He stopped, forcing Hannah to stop with him. He looked at Thomas, who was shrinking back into the crowd. "This woman," Elias pointed a gloved finger at Hannah, "pulled me from the drift. She set my bone. She kept me warm when the fire died. You call her names, you make her sleep with beasts." The crowd was silent. Shame rippled through them. "She has the heart of a lion," Elias declared, "and from this day forward, anyone who disrespects her answers to me." He looked at Hannah. "Help me to the trading post, Hannah." They walked through the town. It was a procession of two. At the trading post, Elias demanded the clerk open his ledger. "I have 3 seasons of prime beaver pelt cash up at the Sweetwater," Elias said. "I'm signing the rights over to you." That's a fortune, Elias," the clerk stammered. "What do you want for it?" "I want the deed to the vacant cabin on the ridge," Elias said, "the one with the stone chimney, and I want supplies for a winter, and I want a dress, a blue one, silk if you have it, calico if you don't." He turned to Hannah. "It's not a palace, but it's not a pigsty. Will you take it?" Hannah wept. She didn't care about the house. She cared about the man who leaned on her. "Only if you come with it, Elias." "I come with the house," he smiled, the scar crinkling. The transformation of Hannah's standing in Fort Laramie was absolute. It wasn't just Elias's protection. It was the story. The story of the Mud Queen saving the bear-scarred hunter, spread like wildfire. Travelers passing through, the early scouts for the mail routes and the wagon trains, heard of her. They heard she knew stories that could make a grown man cry or laugh until his sides hurt. Elias, while his leg healed, encouraged her. "Tell them," he would say when visitors came to their new cabin. Hannah began to tell stories to the travelers. She sat by the hearth, the firelight glowing on her face, and she spun tales. She became the voice of Laramie. Men who were terrified of the unknown West found comfort in her voice. She gave them courage through her legends. Her brothers left town quietly one morning, unable to meet her gaze. Hannah watched them go, feeling no anger, only pity. They had chosen a small life of greed. She had found a vast life of love. It takes time to build a love that lasts, just as it takes time to build a cabin that can withstand the prairie wind. Hannah and Elias did not marry immediately. They spent that winter learning the geography of each other's souls. Elias learned that Hannah was funny, with a sharp wit she had hidden for years. Hannah learned that Elias was gentle, a man who would rescue a spider from a water bucket rather than drown it. His leg healed, though he walked with a permanent rolling limp, a gait that matched the rhythm of Hannah's own heavy steps. They married in the spring, when the wildflowers exploded across the plains in riots of purple and gold. It wasn't a church wedding. A circuit-riding preacher married them on their front porch. The witnesses were the trappers, the innkeeper, who had apologized profusely, and Pip the pig, who had grown into a formidable boar and lived in a luxury pen Elias built for him. The chapter of their romance was written in the small moments. It was Elias brushing Hannah's hair, marveling at its gold color that he said reminded him of the sun at dawn. It was Hannah sewing new buckskins for Elias, making them slightly larger to accommodate the comfort weight he gained from her cooking. 2 years later, the cabin was no longer quiet. A baby boy, Samuel, was born. He was a large baby, crying with a set of lungs that promised he would be a storyteller or a mountain caller. One evening, 5 years after the blizzard, Hannah sat on the porch swing Elias had carved. The sun was setting, painting the sky in the same violent, beautiful colors as the night she was kicked out of her home. Samuel was playing in the grass with a new litter of piglets. Elias came up from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He stopped to look at them. He walked up the steps and sat beside Hannah. The wood creaked comfortingly under their combined weight. He took her hand, his thumb tracing the knuckles. "You thinking about the old days?" Elias asked. Hannah looked at the sty in the distance, now just a small speck in the valley below. "I'm thinking," Hannah said, resting her head on his broad shoulder, "that a sty is a terrible place to sleep, but a wonderful place to wake up, if the right person is there to pull you out." Elias kissed her forehead. "You pulled yourself out, Hannah. I just opened the gate." She squeezed his hand. We pulled each other out. From the valley, the sound of a wagon train approaching drifted up. They would want supplies and water, but mostly they would want to see Hannah. They would want to hear the story of the mountain man and the queen, and how kindness, like the dawn, always finds a way to break the longest night. As the first star appeared, Hannah smiled. She had been a burden to her brothers, but to Elias and to the frontier, she was the anchor. And an anchor, by its very nature, must be heavy to hold the ship safe. She was home.